What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, we're going to talk about growing the sport of lacrosse in the state of Michigan, and really a lot of what I'm going to talk about here can be applied throughout the Midwest as well, I feel like. But just to throw some facts at you guys real quick, according to the Michigan High School Athletic Association, in 2019, girls' participation in lacrosse was up 9.7%, and it's increased every year from 2005 to 2019. Now, on the boys' side, they saw an increase of 5.2% in participation also in 2019. So there's really three layers to this, I feel like, when talking about growing the sport of lacrosse in the state of Michigan, in the Midwest, and really throughout the country as well. And the first level to that is at the youth level. Now, here in Southeast Michigan, we have what's known as the Suburban Lacrosse League, and it's the oldest youth lacrosse league in the state of Michigan, operating since about the early 90s, I believe. So now, when you think about it, the people that participated in it back then in the early to mid 90s have kids now, most likely, and now their kids have the ability to participate in the Suburban Lacrosse League. So that's huge for growing the sport of lacrosse, for getting even parents involved with it as well. And for me, coaching with the Motor City Knights now here as part of the Suburban Lacrosse League, that's one of our biggest things, is not only getting more kids involved, but also getting the parents involved as well, and making it more of a thing that the parents and the players can sort of learn the sport together and make it sort of like a family activity almost that they can do in learning the game and participating in it together. So that's been really cool to see. Again, like I said, that's a big thing that we try to focus on as well. And one of the ways that we are actually able to do that is something that I learned for the first time this fall, that I fell in love with basically from the first day that I was introduced to it, is speed lacrosse. Now, I know this isn't something that's very widespread across the country. It's only in certain areas and certain cities and things like that, but I got the chance to play speed lacrosse this fall, and I got to tell you, I'm almost 23 years old, and I had an absolute blast playing speed lacrosse, and I was out there running around against a bunch of like 10-year-olds. So it was just really fun for me. I know it was a lot of fun for the players as well, and we even had some parents who joined in, grabbed a stick and played with their child as well. So that was a lot of fun to see as well, because again, it comes back to that parent and player involvement and seeing them sort of pick up the game together. So that was a lot of fun to be a part of as well. And then the second tier to this is that there needs to be more of a development or more of a light shined upon the collegiate level here in Michigan, because while there aren't very many Division I programs throughout the state of Michigan, there are only 3 such schools that possess Division I, either men's or women's lacrosse teams, or a few have both, but there are very few schools in the state of Michigan that have Division I college lacrosse. And while to people like you and me in the lacrosse Twitter community, let's say, that might not be such a big deal, because to us, lacrosse is lacrosse. You know, we'll take it any way we can get it. But to an outsider, I think that not seeing that D1 tag associated with a school's lacrosse program might carry a little bit of weight to them, where they might not take it as seriously. So teams that do have Division I lacrosse include Michigan. They have it on the men's and women's side, competing in the Big Ten. The University of Detroit Mercy has men's and women's Division I. The women are going to compete in the newly formed MAC conference this year. That's the Mid-American Conference. The men play in the other, what's known as the MAC conference, the MAAC. So they've both been Division I for, I think, a little over a decade now. And Central Michigan's women's lacrosse team is also Division I. They'll also be participating in that newly formed MAC conference with the Detroit Mercy women. But then when you look around the rest of the state of Michigan and their universities, there's not a whole lot there in terms of high-level programs. I mean, you've got a ton of MCLA programs, you've got a couple NAIA programs, and this isn't a knock on those programs. I played MCLA at Oakland University for a year back in 2016-17, And that was a lot of fun. And we played a lot of high caliber opponents, teams like Michigan State, Minnesota, Pittsburgh was another good one that we faced that year. So it's not a knock on those teams and the level that they are at. But again, like I said, I think when your sport doesn't always carry that D1 tag, it might kind of weigh on some people in a way outside of the Twitter community, and they may not then take it as seriously, or because lacrosse isn't such a universal sport yet, they might not recognize what the NAIA is for lacrosse or what the MCLA is for lacrosse. But like I said, somebody like you or me might fully understand it, and some of us might have even played at the MCLA level as well. And I think really when you look at here in the Midwest with something like the Big Ten lacrosse conference, they only have about 5 or so of the actual Big Ten schools represented in the Big Ten conference. And then they had to bring in Johns Hopkins from the outside as a affiliate member in order to be able to have a Big Ten conference tournament series so that they could have that automatic qualifier for the NCAA tournament. And when you look at the MCLA level, nearly half the Big Ten that isn't already a part of the Big Ten lacrosse conference is playing at the MCLA level. And one of the biggest ones probably, especially here in the state of Michigan, is Michigan State University. And they're probably, to me, the biggest one at the MCLA level, and they're one that I've seen it on Instagram over the past couple of years. There's been people that have brought up the conversation of when, if ever, should Michigan State go Division I. And I think that in terms of taking lacrosse more seriously here in the state of Michigan and bringing more attention to the sport really here in the state of Michigan, I think it would go such a long way to have a program like Michigan State represented in the Big Ten and not just playing down there in the MCLA. Again, no disrespect to the MCLA. I played in that league. It was a fantastic experience for me. But again, I think looking at it from an outsider's perspective, seeing Michigan State competing in the MCLA versus competing in the Big Ten, I think makes a world of difference to somebody that is an outsider to the sport. But then another thing, which has been a big discussion on Lax Twitter, I've noticed for the past 48 hours or so, is the ability to watch games and stream games, especially here in the state of Michigan and the Midwest, as I've mentioned this episode is about. And when you look around the state of Michigan, I know for a fact Oakland University has streamed games in the past during the 2017-18 season because I was the one responsible for doing that, so I know very well firsthand of that situation. But then I know Grand Valley State, who is, I believe, a D2 club, has streamed their games in the past as well. I think Lawrence Tech has on occasion, and so has Madonna University out near Ann Arbor has streamed games in the past as well. But one of the problems with that is that while they are doing this, the schools aren't really, outside of the state of Michigan, very recognizable names. They don't carry the same kind of notoriety that a Michigan State University would, or a University of Michigan, or even Detroit Mercy might. You know, not many people know what Lawrence Tech is or where it is or where Madonna is, unless I just told you, obviously. But that does seem like a bit of an issue here in the state of Michigan, because when I did an Oakland University lacrosse game a few years ago, streaming on Periscope, that game got 600 views in about 12 hours, if I'm remembering correctly. So really, I think, and even you can look at the games going on today. You've got Bellarmine and Mercer playing this afternoon. There's no stream whatsoever for that game, and I mentioned this was a conversation going on Lacrosse Twitter the past day or two. And then the Denver versus Utah game today, you have to pay a $10 subscription to be able to view that game. So there's been a big discussion on Lacrosse Twitter about being able to watch more lacrosse games more regularly and having more access to that, because that is, believe it or not, a big part about growing the game, is being able to watch it on TV or on various streaming services, like how the PLL had NBC Sports and NBC Sports Gold up until the end of this year. Now we know, as they're likely going to be switching over to the streaming service Peacock. But again, it is a big part of it, and it helps you grow as a brand for your team, whether it be Oakland University or whoever, but also just the sport as well, being able to put it in front of somebody's face and say, here, you have the ability to go watch this game now. And then finally, we get to the pro level here in Michigan, and I've been a big advocate for getting the PLL to come to the state of Michigan and play one of their tour weekends here. Obviously, that wasn't an option in 2020. They went with the championship series due to COVID, but now that they've announced that they want to go back to the tour model in 2021 starting June 4th, I am really hoping that they will bring a weekend here to the state of Michigan. And really, I think there's 3 cities that could do really well at hosting a PLL weekend. I think one of the bigger ones is probably Grand Rapids. Another one would be Ann Arbor, and another could be Detroit. Now, Detroit, I'd say, would probably be the 3rd choice on that list, behind Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor. But there's 3 places I think that really could excel at hosting a PLL weekend and bring pro lacrosse to the state of Michigan. And again, it's all about that exposure, getting these kids in front of the pro game and showing them what that's all about, getting parents and other people just outside of the lacrosse world to understand, yes, there is a professional lacrosse game. Because I bet you could go up to any random person on the street and ask them to name one professional lacrosse league here in North America, and they probably wouldn't even know that there was one, let alone up until about a month ago, there used to be 3. So I think, again, that all just goes back to that exposure to the game of lacrosse. And the NLL, on top of that, has said, after they announced the Panther City Lacrosse Club as one of their expansion teams, they said that they wanted to continue expanding into the future into new areas. And I think that the state of Michigan would be a great place to put an expansion team in the NLL. And I think that the biggest place to do it would be in Grand Rapids. Like I said, the PLL possibly hosting a PLL weekend in Grand Rapids. I'd love to see the NLL come to a city like Grand Rapids, where they've been known to have minor sports teams and things there, where they've had the past few years, they've had the Grand Rapids Drive, which is the G League affiliate of the Pistons, not after last season, but for the past few years they have been. And then for about as long as I can think of, they've had the Grand Rapids Griffins, which is the Red Wings minor league club. So Grand Rapids, I think, would be a fantastic place to put an NLL team, and you can have them play in Van Andel Arena, which was the home to the Grand Rapids Drive and the Grand Rapids Griffins as well. So it would be a perfect situation, a perfect city, perfect venue for something like the NLL. And as far as box lacrosse in the state of Michigan, we do have an IBLA team here in the state of Michigan, in Detroit, in the Detroit Hooligans. I actually played for at Oakland a couple guys that are a part of that team, so that's really cool. But to say that pro lacrosse would not be well received in the state of Michigan, I think is completely false. And I think it's something that, if it's not this year, maybe next year, or in the near future, in the next couple of years, is something that needs to happen in order to help the game grow here in the state and in the Midwest, because the PLL, after the championship series, actually identified the state of Michigan as an up-and-coming hotbed for lacrosse here in the United States. So really, to wrap this all up, if you haven't kind of seen a theme here in this episode so far, it is the overall exposure to the sport of lacrosse for people that aren't already a part of the lacrosse community, getting them more familiar with it, more comfortable with it. And one of the things that the director of the team that I now work with, the Motor City Knights, the one thing he always says is just kind of give them the basics, teach them how to pass and catch and do all that. Just get a stick in their hands, and the game almost seems to sell itself. And having coached with him since about August, I can say that I'm starting to see that is really the case. When you give somebody just the basics of what they need to know as far as just getting a stick in their hands, and even something, as I said, like speed lacrosse, just doing something as simple as that, the sport really kind of sells itself to people more often than not, I think. But the overall message here is getting more exposure any way and every way that we can to the game of lacrosse. And you guys know I try to do that all the time here on this podcast. That's the entire point of this episode, really. But just developing the youth level and continuing to make that more accessible to more kids throughout the state, throughout the region, and throughout the country, and really covering more lacrosse and growing the collegiate level, making people aware that, hey, if you want to go and play lacrosse after high school, if you've been playing it since you were in second and third grade and you want to keep playing it, you do have options outside of those Division I programs that I mentioned to go and play at a pretty high level, whether it be NAIA, MCLA, whatever the case may be, and introducing people to the professional level, whether it be the PLL, the NLL, whatever it may be, just getting more eyes on the game. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. And you can also check out past episodes of the podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get it, you can find us there. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.